the city in Park West, in Hunters Wood, in Metropolitan Apartments, in Hyde Square and the South Circular Road. I'd also like to start by commending the very, very good work, in some cases over many years, of the Apartment Owners Network, of the Construction Defects Alliance, who you know, and the more recently established Not Our Fault 100% Redress campaign. All of these groups have been arguing for quite some time of the need for a full redress scheme for homeowners, apartments, duplexes and houses affected by Celtic Tiger era defects. In fact, it was the very, very good work, particularly of the Construction Defects Alliance, supported by many of us in opposition, that ensured that both in the manifestos of political parties, including the ministers in the last general election, and then in the programme for government, there was a commitment to examine the issue, both of the need for a redress scheme and more generally for a strengthening of building control, so that the kinds of scandals that we've seen during the Celtic Tiger never happened again. And the Minister knows from his time on the Oireachtas Housing Committee, from the Safest Houses report to other reports he has commissioned, that the cause of building defects is twofold. It is shoddy practice within industry, widespread over many years during the Celtic Tiger era period. But it was also the light touch self-regulation introduced by both Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil in the 80s and 90s that allowed that shoddy behaviour to take place. And the consequence, as the Minister's own independent working group report on defective buildings shows, as many as 100,000 homes could be affected by serious fire safety, water ingress, cladding, car parking and other structural defects. I want to acknowledge the work of the working group. I think the report is very helpful. And I also note that the Minister has said that he will be bringing a memo from his cross-departmental working group of civil servants to Cabinet before the end of the year, and I welcome seeing that. However, I do want to stress to the Minister, when I talk to homeowners, as I'm sure you do, there is an enormous frustration that 2.5 years into this government, we still don't have a scheme. We have the promise of a scheme, the details of which and the timeline of which we still don't know. But for families, particularly families with children, living in fire safety, defective buildings or buildings with other structural defects, the wait is simply too long. And it really is hard to understand why it has taken so long. Minister, the reason why we've tabled this motion tonight is to stress in the strongest possible terms the homeowners, the many that are here in the gallery, and the many thousands in developments across the country, in Belmain, in Beacon South Quarter, in Bruna Shunna, in Clare, in your own constituency, for example. These homeowners need a scheme, and they need a scheme now. And I've said it to you before, and I'm going to say it here again. I am concerned that even if you bring a memo to Cabinet before Christmas announcing the broad outline of how you intend to proceed, if it takes the same length of time to go from announcement to opening of the scheme as it is currently doing for the enhanced effective block scheme for the counties affected by pyrite, mica and pyrrhotite, it could be well over a year or more before a scheme for these homeowners and tenants even opens, let alone before they get any redress. It was a year ago last week that you announced the enhanced effective block scheme. The legislation passed through the Oireachtas over the summer, but the regulations still aren't complete, and we don't expect them to be ready until next year. Then the local authorities will have to set the scheme up and running. There is no significant additional budgetary provision for this year as compared to last year. And in fact, we've just come from the Housing Committee, where the National Standards Authority of Ireland have told us that their review of the statutory instrument underpinning that scheme, IS 465, won't actually be complete until 2024. If the same kind of approach is taken for the redress scheme for homeowners with Celtic Tiger era defects, that is simply too long, and therefore we need a different approach. My strong view, as you know, and I responded to your invitation to set out our own party's views this week, is that we need a scheme very, very similar to the pyrite remediation scheme. It needs to be 100% redress end to end. Given the complexities of owners' management companies and the varied ownerships of units in multi-development schemes, the only way for such a scheme to work is for it to be led by an owners' management company, making a request to a state agency for inspections, agreement of work, and for all of the works to be contracted out by that state agency. and how the state then deals with, for example, the issue of institutional landlords or landlords that own more than one property can be dealt with. But for owners whose defective apartment is their principal private dwelling, for tenancies which are social tenancies, and for landlords with a single property, there needs to be upfront 100% redress provided through such a state agency. I know you don't agree with the suggestion that I've made before, but I think it might be because you don't fully understand it. I accept there's going to be a need for underpinning legislation for a new scheme, but I do think you could take the Pirate Remediation Board. It has an office, it has staff, it has expertise. On an initial non-statutory basis, you could expand its remit, bring forward the legislation in parallel, and that would allow that body to deal with the scheme as it rolls out. That would also allow that body to deal with, for example, the issue of the provision of emergency funding, either to deal with emergency fire safety works that are required now, that can't wait for a scheme, or indeed for interim measures, and you know what they are, the Construction Defects Alliance and others have told you, additional fire alarm sprinkler systems, or indeed in some cases fire wardens. I also have to stress, Minister, this scheme has to be retrospective. There are people who have paid thousands, and in some cases tens of thousands of euros under duress from insurance companies raising or threatening to withdraw premia, or on the advice of our fire safety authorities. Those people cannot be left behind. They must be included in any scheme, and an element of retrospection is required. We know, for example, landlords who carry out capital works on properties to improve them can write that down off their tax liability into the future. I think that provides some mechanism to give those homeowners 100% redress. Finally, I'd just like to raise two other issues with you, Minister, and the first is NAMA and receivers acting on behalf of NAMA. One of the many aspects of this scandal is the appalling way in which NAMA and the receivers engage with owners' management companies and residents when dealing with defective buildings. Carrickmines Green is one, Bruna Shunna is another. And I know NAMA is independent, but the Minister of Finance needs to make it very clear NAMA needs to take a different approach and work with OMCs and owners to address these issues, not against them. And finally, I would urge you again to look at the need for a levy on the profits of large companies. Cairn Homes, one of the most profitable companies in the state, the director of Cairn Homes was the director of a company that was responsible for Belmain. It is simply unconscionable that Cairn Homes is in receipt of significant state aid and planning permissions, making huge profits, and none of those profits are being levied and go to remediating properties, for example, in Belmain, something I'm sure you agree with. So please give us good news today, work with the opposition, tell us when we are going to get a scheme, and give the families that are in the gallery here today and all others like them real redress in 2023.
McLaughlin. Minister, as you know, I live in the epicentre of the defective block crisis in Donegal. I live, as you know, in Buncrana in the Inishowen Peninsula, and people's lives have been utterly destroyed. There's hardly anybody I know of my age that's built their own home or bought a home or was in a council home that hasn't been devastated by the crisis there. So I want to take this opportunity to say tonight, no matter where you live in Ireland, whether you're from Dublin and North Leinster in terms of the Pyrite scheme, whether you're from the communities in this city and across Ireland that's affected by the defects, the lack of oversight of the building industry, the self-certification, the self-regulation, the no regulation, the light touch regulation, or if you're a victim of defective concrete blocks along the west of Ireland, and indeed now it could be as many as 13 or 14 counties, we have to say as a state that we will deliver 100% redress because you have done nothing wrong. You know, in good faith, you engage in the social contract. That is, if you work hard, you've got an education, you get trained up, and you're in a job and you work hard, you try and own your own home. You put your trust in the professionals. That home is tip-top. You pay your mortgage for X amount of years, and you have your home when you're an older person. That's the contract. And that contract was torn up. Myself and Deputy O'Brien spent 3 hours earlier in the Housing Committee looking at the issue of quarries and just the lack of regulation there. So my message to the people up there in the gallery is, no matter where you're from in Ireland, if you're a victim of the utter failure of the state to regulate and hold these people to account, then you need 100% redress. It's as simple as that. That's natural justice, and everybody, no matter where you live in Ireland, deserves that.
The last few days we're being warned about the severe weather conditions in the days ahead, and -7 degrees has been mentioned. We're told not to be afraid to turn on the heating, that the government will help. Now imagine if you're living in a pyrite home in Mayo, or a mica home, or a pyrite home in Donegal, with the gaping gaps in the walls, and wind and frost coming through, where the window frames have detached from the blocks, and you've been looking at this for the last 10 years, 10 winters. Across the state, homeowners and tenants impacted by building defects have to endure another winter. Hundreds of families across Mayo have their lives torn apart by pyrite, and the sad thing about it is that it was totally avoidable. They were the victims of light or no regulation. This was not their fault. So why are we asking them to bear the responsibility for the injustice of pyrite and of defects, for the failure of government to regulate to protect them? And it's as simple as that. And now the failure of government to recognise the need for 100% redress to replace the homes they pay for. Honestly, Minister, this is the problem. We met in Westport about 10 days ago again with all of the homeowners who have been impacted there. They were homeowners who were actually given the mortgages by Mayo County Council, who were billed by a housing body. So it was oversight by all of the government bodies. And they're being told... See, what's happening is that so many of them cannot afford to get this work done. They cannot afford it because it's not 100%. And you can't turn 70 or 80 or 90% into 100%. We have to look at the people that we're excluding from the scheme that there is. Also, Minister, in terms of the foundations, this conversation has to stop. The foundations have to be included in the repairs that are there. The other thing I want you to do, Minister, is to talk to the banks. I mean, we talked to the banks in the last week about the cap of 500,000 being lifted. And we have the banks. I have a letter here from the bank to the homeowner who is impacted by pyrite, saying that I desperately need some funding to be able to access this scheme. And the bank are basically saying, no, there's nothing for you here. There's no equity in your house, so we don't want to know. Minister, there are so many things that need to be done in this scheme to be fixed.
Over many years, Minister, so many couples have scraped and sacrificed and saved the money that they needed to buy their dream home. However, a few years into living into their new home, it's turned into a nightmare because they find that their home is not safe to live in. And of course, they can't sell it. They can't afford the cost of making things right. And as has been said, they've had no hand, act or part in causing the defects. The person and the people who caused the defects are long gone. Government now wants the residents to pick up the tab. Government wants the residents to pick up the tab for government's light and no-touch regulation. This is what happened in Poolbeg Quay. Residents in Poolbeg Quay had their dream homes turned into a nightmare. And government needs to step up to the plate and make things right. Government needs to commit to a 100% redress scheme. Oh my God.
Again, Minister, today I've been speaking with residents from the Oaks in Mullingar, County Westmeath, and I want to commend their perseverance and their absolute doggedness and determination to see this through. In 2010, the 32 homes affected had their insurance cancelled due to identified fire and construction defects, and a minor but recent problematic flood damaged walls, floors, furniture. None of it was insured. I'm told the Oaks was inspected by the local authority and 2 notices were served on the developer, followed by a court case in 2010. The judge ruled that the matter was too serious for district court. The local authority said it would take 6 weeks to prepare a case and requested the case be struck out, and it was. The situation remained. The residents thought that following a fire in the development in early 21 that the local authority would finally act definitively. That wasn't to be, and the situation remains still. The residents of the Oaks have been extremely proactive in attempting to resolve this issue, but they have been effectively stonewalled. They don't have a wish list of outlandish requirements. They want their homes to be safe, to be compliant, to be insurable and to be sellable. And as one resident said to me this afternoon, I'm a mother of 3. one of whom is autistic. We bought a one-bedroom apartment in 2007. In 2009, we received news about the fire safety issues. We have been renting and paying a mortgage since 2009. We've moved at least 10 times. With the rising cost of living, we may have no other option but to move back into that debt trap. This is a noose around our neck that keeps on tightening. That light touch regulation introduced by Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil and widespread shoddy practice by the building industry during the Celtic Tiger led to these building defects. And this government and previous governments have failed to deal with that legacy and the practices that they facilitated. Yet it's residents like those in the Oaks and those here in the public gallery this evening who are left to face the full impact of the failures of others. And Minister, that is shameful.
Minister, we're talking about the possibility of upon 100,000 homes and building defects. And in fairness, some of my colleagues have already spoken about the human impact, because we have to think of that. We have to think of homes. And I'm sure the people up in the gallery can tell you particular stories. It's already been said here before about how people did absolutely nothing wrong, went out and bought homes, thought they were doing the right thing, got their mortgages, did absolutely everything correct, and then because of the sins of others were left in an absolutely shameful situation. We know that there are a huge amount of people who've already been put under considerable pressure in relation to delivering their own solutions, because it's been forced on them in relation to fire regulations or in relation to insurance. And that's why, when we do finally deal with a proper scheme, and Deputy O'Brien, who obviously has done a considerable amount of work in relation to this, we know the Safe as Houses report is to a degree accepted about as where it is, and the fact that there needs to be a redress scheme that has been to some degree accepted by government. We know we have a working group that was set up in 2021, but what we really need to see is delivery, because in fairness, these people have waited far, far too long. Like, we could have had this debate over any time in the last number of years and we would still be saying the same thing. Far, far too long, because of the sins of others, as I said, and here it's been said by almost everybody that's spoken, and I imagine it will be repeated almost ad nauseum. It's the fact that there was little or no regulation, and the only place you can leave that responsibility is with government. So we need to ensure that these people who have done absolutely nothing wrong, that we deliver for them. Because what is the alternative? The alternative at one stage has been proposed by government in 2016, and I accept, Minister, not exactly your government, was the fact that they were personally responsible for this. But I would like to commend a significant amount of work that has been done by politicians, but also by residents and by the Construction Defects Alliance, who pushed back in relation to that we're at least having the correct conversation. But the correct conversation is a scheme that could be based on the Pyrite Resolution Scheme, and it needs to be 100% redress, and that's end-to-end. Look, Deputy McLaughlin and others, and I imagine more, will speak in relation to the difficulties that exist in relation to the defective block scheme at this point in time. And that's a case where the government went almost went the journey that was necessary, but failed at the final hurdle. So we need to ensure that that doesn't happen. We know that speed is absolutely of the essence, because once again, we're in this chamber and we are talking about failures. But we can talk in very general terms in failures. They're not very general terms for the people who are in this gallery, where they have been impacted, where they are living on a day-by-day basis with houses and homes that aren't safe, that aren't fit for purpose. And I'm going to repeat it again. For mistakes that others made that was not their responsibility. And let's be absolutely clear, because we've all said it many times before, what people expect of a government is that a government is there to have their back, that the correct regulations are in play, that we ensure that we can deliver for people, that they are safe in the sense that they can go out and they can buy houses, that all the necessary due diligence and regulation has been done. And if there are people who have failed to comply with the necessary rules, that they are brought to task. So not only do we need this resolution scheme in place, we also need to make sure that we root out and ensure we have the regulation that this never happens again. But Minister, it's beyond time. We need to deliver for these people. We need to deliver now.
I welcome, as others have, welcomed the owners and the residents in the gallery and those who are watching from home, some from my own constituency of Dublin South Central, those in Park West Crescents and from the Metropolitan Apartments and from the Tramyard and from many, many other apartment blocks and housing complexes. As I said, not just in my own constituency, we are across the country. Most of you are facing demands of tens of thousands of euros to carry out even the initial repairs to make safe the homes that you thought were your own and were secure and fire safe when you purchased them. And that's without the 40 and 50,000 then that comes after as a demand. I know in the Park West, in the Crescent, the demand is €67,000 per home. There's nobody I know amongst those who own those properties have that to foot up. Nobody. We're in a housing crisis, we're in a cost of living crisis, and yet that's the demand. We know who caused the problem, and we know the builders and developers who took shortcuts, risked lives of those who are now in their homes. We need immediate announcement from the government, and I welcome what the Minister was saying, but we need that the scheme will be 100% redress and will be retrospective, and that would allow the management company and the residents and the owners to take immediate steps to make their apartments safe and to draw down money if they can. If a government announces that, then they probably go to the banks, and as you said, you've talked to the banks, and that needs to be one of the solutions, that the bank, once the government has indicated that they can draw down the money. Because if we are to wait months or years, we are asking those people to stay in properties that are not safe. And that's the state asking that, because you have an opportunity to take immediate action. We're asking them to sleep in their bed and worry and continue stressing about the building around them. Minister, I believe that we need to take further steps and a lot quicker than you have indicated. Even though progress has been made, we need that retrospective immediately.
Minister, you say you understand the problem, and I suppose the next step then is to try and resolve it. You say it can't be done in a rush fashion, and you mentioned the fact that it might take up to 10 years. I don't think anyone that I've talked to, and there's been a number of residents in my constituency, Ballycullen, City West, Rathfarnham, any of the ones that I talked to, Minister, I don't think they can wait that long. They're terrified, they're afraid, they're angry, extremely angry, because I think there's a common agreement that homeowners are not responsible for the defects. It's like light touch building control. But I suppose the really galling thing is that developers can walk away, liquidate their company, reinvent themselves under a different name and start trading across the road. Now, there's something sick in a society that actually allows that. And there's something wrong with corporate Ireland if that's the way we're going to allow things to continue to go on. Because that's what's happening at the moment. Many of these developers made huge sums of money during the Celtic Tiger. And many of them liquidated themselves, and as I say, they've reinvented themselves under the name of their sons or daughters, or even just changed the name or changed the initial, and they can somehow reinvent themselves. But the challenge for the owners then is you're left with that property. Now, let's talk about the owners. Some of them have downsized. Some of them have moved to apartments, thinking that their mortgage is clear now. They'll be able to retire and get on with their lives. And now they're faced with this huge worry. So, Minister, we need to be doing more in relation to supporting them. It's not acceptable that developers can walk away. It is about 100% redress. It is about coming up with a scheme that works, but it has to be fast and quick and deliver for ordinary people. And I suppose that's the common message I think we can all agree on tonight, that we need to come up with ideas, and ideas soon.
Minister, tens of thousands of homeowners across the country are faced with the prospect of having to find large sums of money to pay for essential remediation works on homes and apartments that have a range of structural defects, including fire safety issues with either poorly installed or no fire stopping, with fire-resistant materials in openings or joints between walls and floors, water ingress leading to leaky roofs, and water running down the inside of windows leading to mould and dampness in rooms. Campaign groups have estimated that as many as 100,000 homeowners living in homes constructed between 1991 and 2013 are affected by a range of defects which will require urgent repair and refurbishment. It is also estimated that up to 90,000 residences are affected by fire safety defects. In this time of economic uncertainty and a cost of living crisis, who would be able to readily find the huge sums being demanded to fix problems not of their making? In my own constituency of Dublin North West, some newly built homes built as part of the regeneration project in Onsilla, Silog and parts of Carton and Ballymun suffered damage caused by the defective building material pyrite. In these developments, a total of 274 houses and apartments were found to be defective, and most of these have been remediated by Dublin City Council. The state's regulatory regime allowed, in some cases, the errant behaviour by developers who built poorly quality residences. This proved costly to both the state and the council, who had to shoulder the cost to correct these defects. We are in a housing emergency, and there are 58 apartments in Prospect Hill complex in Finglas lying idle for over 15 years. Construction began in 2004 on council-owned land. The builders entered into an agreement with the Dublin City Council to supply it with 150 affordable homes and 35 senior citizens' apartments. They went into receivership in 2012. In 2014, repairs and refurbishments were to be carried out by Clued, and they would begin allocating the apartments to families. These apartments are still lying idle and were later found to be non-compliant with fire safety standards. In recent years, they had been transferred to Dublin City Council, and an Area E in which they are located in Dublin City Council has a huge housing waiting list and a homeless problem. It is beyond belief that these apartments continue to be vacant.
I'd like to welcome all the homeowners here, as well as others have said, who are in the gallery today. I'd also like to recognise them for the pressure they've exerted over the years to get us to the point where we are. As this motion suggests, there is some way to go, and we must ensure that the right path is taken that can ensure those homeowners that they are compensated fully and that they are compensated as swiftly as possible. In the report of the working group to examine defects in housing, under 20% of Tipperary's total number of apartments, duplexes constructed between 1991 and 2016 were represented. This is a significant number. Of course, the full extent of the problem, as the organisations would agree, is not known, so it would be remiss of me not to speak on this motion in the interest of my own constituents. Let me say here and now that Sinn Féin believes that the homeowners and tenants are not responsible for these defects. The Safest Houses report argued that light touch regulation introduced by Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil and shoddy practices by the industry during the Celtic Tiger led to common defects. Those affected shouldn't be picking up the bill just to make their homes safe. Thankfully, the Construction Defects Alliance has not let up on their campaign, and with the support of us and others, they have forced the current government to move from the position of the Fine Gael minority government who tried to put the burden on the homeowners and tenants. But after 2.5 years, the current government has provided no clarity on a redress scheme. But if one is introduced on the same basis as the Enhanced Effective Concrete Block scheme, then homeowners may not be able to access such a scheme and receive funding for remediation until 2024 at the earliest. Now, mind you, talking, Minister, about a sticky plaster solution. Just bring in a scheme which these families don't have to wait another 2 years for. That is why we're calling on the government to urgently establish a redress scheme for all impacted homes, to expand the terms of reference of the Pirates Resolution Board to ensure the scheme opens in early 2023, and to provide an interim funding for emergency works in the meantime. The scheme must be retrospective for those forced to pay for remediation of defects and prioritise those developments with the greatest level of fire safety and structural risk. People who have put their lives investments into these properties should not be asked to bear the burden of poor building control regulation by previous governments led by Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach. I'd like to begin by welcoming the people in the gallery, and I'd also like to welcome the publication of the report of the working group to examine defects in housing. It is obvious that a lot of work has gone into its 260 pages, Minister. The report estimates that up to 100,000 homes could be affected by building defects, with a potential cost of remediation as high as €2.5 billion. There are many examples of building defects throughout the country, and the obvious ones are mica and pyrite, and we in Sinn Féin support 100% redress for the individuals and families affected. There are many homeowners who feel the effect of the light touch regulation hangover from the Celtic Tiger. Residents in Oak Grove, Derrinturn, have had to endure collapsing canopies, serious cracks and other defects in their homes. In March 2015, a fire ripped through a terrace of 6 homes in Millfield Manor in Newbridge, County Kildare. The timber frame construction used in the building was supposed to provide an hour-long fire break between each home. The 90-house development was built by Barrick Construction between 2006 and 2009, and the blaze burnt all 6 homes to the ground in less than half an hour. It's a miracle, Minister, that nobody was killed. The affected families were left with nothing except the clothes on their back. A report was commissioned and only became public because of a Freedom of Information request by Teachta O'Brien. Residents have described the report as a whitewash, as it identified the risk was moderate. The cost of remediation from the remaining homes is estimated at €35,000 per home, money the residents do not have. The director of Barrick Homes, Paddy Byrne, filed for bankruptcy in Britain with debts of €100 million. The bankruptcy was extended from 1 to 10 years after it transpired that Mr Byrne had sought to conceal funds by transferring €500,000 to his ex-wife and another €500,000 to his niece. In 2012, Mr Byrne formed a new company, Victoria Homes, with his sister listed as director. By 2019, Victoria Homes was involved in 24 separate developments. For too long, there has been a cosy relationship with developers and no consequences for wrongdoers. This needs to stop. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Minister, we need action, we need 100% redress, we need consequences, or things will never change. And Minister, if you're not willing to change the consequences, well then it's time the government left.
Stanley.
I want to welcome the people here in the public gallery, people who were affected. And these people and homeowners across the state impacted by building defects, they have been badly let down by successive governments. Our proposal here is calling for the support to finance the scheme for those homes that require emergency works, prioritising those with greatest fire risk and structural defects. And I heard what the Minister said in that regard. Poor regulation and light touch regulation by successive governments has left tens of thousands of families and couples in housing emergency and in a state with a bill of a multi-billion euro bill. Riverside in Portarlington, built during the Celtic Tiger period, flat complex, apartment complex, scandalous. The water came straight through the walls. I witnessed it. People with mortgages in it, with homes that they couldn't even inhabit. And that's a legacy of the Fianna Fáil and Progressive Democrat government and the Green government of the North East. Up to 2014, a developer could self-certify that a house or home was up to standard, only for homeowners to discover that they were not. The so-called home bond scheme wasn't worth the paper it was written on, or the money that people paid for it. Back in 2014, when we were trying to clean up the mess left by the Celtic Tiger and the recession that followed it, then, as the Sinn Féin spokesperson on local government and planning, I raised this issue with Minister Phil Hogan at the time, and I told him that there was flaws in the legislation that he was pushing through the Dáil at that time, that he was introducing. That legislation failed to deal effectively with the issue of self-certification. The changes made simply directed that the certifier would be hired by the developer, and this left a clear conflict of interest. I pointed out this to Phil Hogan, sitting exactly in the chair where you are now, and I was standing exactly here, Minister. You know, and I'm pointing it out to you 8 years later. Secondly, as recommended by the All-Party Housing Committee in 2017, there remains totally inadequate insurance cover for homeowners, and this needs to be addressed. As pointed out by Minister Darragh O'Brien, then in the Senate, a member of the Senate, he said that certain insurance companies, quote, washed their hands of it and walked away, unquote. Thousands of families still haven't received any redress there. We need a truly independent certification process with certifiers employed directly by the local authorities, as happens in other jurisdictions. And the all-party report set out clearly in 2017. It said to completely break the self-certification element that remains with SI 19, design certifiers and assigned certifiers they should be employed directly by local authorities. We need to deal with this, Minister. We have to deal with this problem once and for all. We don't want another generation. There's 2 generations already. We don't want another generation of people here looking for redress in 20 years' time. We need to fix it now, and we need to work together on it.
Deputy Louise Riley.
Thank you, Cahirlock, and I want to welcome the people who are up in the gallery, and I want to say I understand that it is not easy for you to sit here this evening and to hear your homes, your life, your future debated in this way. I think it's important that we're having this debate, but I know that for you it can't be easy for you to have to listen to this. So you are all very welcome, and welcome to anyone who is watching on. I want to commend the work of the representative groups from the Construction Defects Alliance and others, and I also want to commend the work of my colleague Teachta Owen O'Brien. Chair, for many years Sinn Féin has been campaigning for a redress scheme for homeowners and tenants impacted by Celtic Tiger era defects. There are tens of thousands of workers, families, renters and homeowners impacted by this. The report by the Department of Housing Working Group found that fire safety, water ingress and structural issues are present in 80% of apartments built between 1991 and 2013. I want to acknowledge the work that was put into this report. The scale of the problem is a direct result of government policy and light touch regulation. 6 different governments sat during this period, encompassing Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, Labour, Democratic Left, Progressive Democrats, the Green Party and a host of independents, and they may all reflect on their role in this scandal. It wasn't an accident that defective houses and apartments were built. It's what happens when an industry is allowed to self-regulate with the approval of the political system. This didn't happen in a vacuum, Minister. It happened with the approval of the political system. This light touch regulation resulted in widespread shoddy practices by industry during the Celtic Tiger and led to serious building defects across the state. Homeowners and tenants impacted by building defects have been badly let down. Across Fingal, the scars of government failure are to be seen. The length and breadth of my constituency, and Minister, I am not going to name the individual estates because they know who they are, and they are already suffering enough without having their address tramped through the Dáil as well. Those impacted need to be supported. The government have been dragging their heels on this for far too long. Homeowners and tenants are not to blame for building defects. It is not their fault. Yet they've been left in limbo. They need certainty. They need reassurance. They need to be listened to and treated with respect. Our motion tonight demands 100% redress for those impacted by building defects. It seeks to ensure that such a scheme to support people affected is fair by providing interim funding for emergency works and short-term measures such as fire wardens in advance of full redress. It also prioritises those at greatest fire safety and structural risk and ensures that the scheme includes social landlords, including local authorities and approved housing bodies. Crucially, it would ensure that the scheme is an end-to-end scheme rather than a grant scheme, and calls on the government to consider expanding the terms of reference to ensure it can open in early 2023. It would ensure that the scheme is retrospective for those forced to pay for remediation of defects in advance of the opening of the scheme. These measures would make a considerable difference to the people affected and ensure that the scheme is fit for purpose. And I am calling on all TDs from all parties to back this motion to stand up for homeowners and for tenants affected by building defects. It is not good enough to say that you won't oppose this, Minister. You must support this motion. The people impacted by this are not to blame, and it's long overdue that they were treated fairly. It's not enough for TDs, and in particular government TDs, to pay lip service to supporting people who are impacted by these scandals. They need to do the right thing. They need to stand up when it really counts. Finally, I want to particularly urge my constituency colleague, Minister Darragh O'Brien, to stand with those people in Fingal who are affected by building defects and support this motion, not to simply not oppose it. I've spoken to many people impacted by this from my own constituency. They've done nothing wrong. Many of them have put themselves into significant debt to make their homes safe, or else they lie awake at night worried about how they are going to repair their unsafe homes and how they are going to find money that they haven't got to simply be able to sleep in their bed safe at night. They are the victims of the failure of the state to regulate. They bought their homes in good faith. They were let down by a failure of government regulation. They've done nothing wrong. They deserve our support. They must be allowed to put this behind them to get on with their lives in safe and secure homes.
Thank you, Deputy. That concludes the debate, and I now must put the question, and the question is that the motion be agreed to. Is the motion agreed? Agreed. Motion agreed.